Ever in the history of the world has there been a couple that has grifted as hard and as successfully as they have, right? You just grifted off of your family.
Her do these physical acts and bellies moving and disappearing
Yeah.
throughout her pregnancy that gave you pause.
Son Archie, and even her daughter Lilibet. And many people even wonder, are their children even real?
Something didn't add up. And once people started noticing, they couldn't stop. Meghan Markle has been unusually quiet about her pregnancies, about the births, about the details most mothers can't stop talking about. But Prince Harry, he's been the one making the wild claims, saying things that had Hollywood side-eyeing hard. And you have to ask yourself, why? Why would he be the one talking while she stays silent? Then came the birth story. Meghan, center stage, voice shaking just enough, telling a miracle moment like she'd rehearsed every pause. The audience was hooked, cameras flashing, emotions high. It felt real until the internet went back and checked. Dates didn't match. Details shifted from earlier interviews, the timeline blurred, and what started as admiration flipped into something Meghan's team was clearly not prepared for. A full-on breakdown of her story, in real time, in front of millions. The receipts surfaced fast, and once they did, her carefully polished version started cracking from every direction. This wasn't just one bad moment. What unfolded next would pull in a sharp-tongued media personality, a mysterious 1997 magazine, a yogurt commercial, and questions about Meghan's past that nobody had dared to ask out loud until now. It started like so many of Meghan's moments do. Emotional, carefully lit, and perfectly timed. She stepped into the spotlight with a new telling of her baby's birth, voice slightly unsteady, eyes carrying just enough weight to pull people in. The story sounded heartfelt. It sounded raw. And for a moment, the audience was completely with her. Cameras flashing, emotions running high, people leaning in like they were witnessing something genuinely personal and real. But sharp-eyed viewers did what the internet always eventually does. They went back, they rewound, they pulled up old interviews and laid them side by side. And that's when it started falling apart. The dates didn't line up. The setting had shifted. The tone had gone from difficult and raw to smooth and almost picture perfect. Details that had been told one way before were suddenly being told differently. Cleaner, more dramatic, more designed. And the quiet doubts that some people had been holding on to privately, they got loud, fast. What was supposed to be a touching moment for a mother sharing something sacred turned into a full breakdown online. Every clip got analyzed. Every pause got questioned. Every word got picked apart like it was hiding something underneath. People watching stopped feeling like they were seeing a mother open up.
Thank you for being here. I guess before we even get to this theory of yours that Meghan's pregnancy could have been fake,
Started feeling like they were watching a rehearsed scene play out in front of a live audience. Because for most people, motherhood sits in a category of its own. It's sacred, it's unfiltered, and it's the one thing that never gets turned into content. So when critics started whispering that even that space was being reshaped into something strategic, something polished and prepackaged, it hit differently. It didn't just feel like a contradiction. It felt like a line had been crossed. And that's exactly when one well-known media personality walked in, and she wasn't holding back. She didn't ease into it. There was no soft opener, no to be fair moment. This vocal critic came in direct, sharp, and completely sure of herself. And that confidence is exactly what made people stop scrolling and pay attention. She called it what she believed it was, a soap opera of self-pity, produced, packaged, and delivered with serious money behind it. And she didn't just say it and move on. She brought receipts, old clips, past interviews, side-by-side comparisons, every shift in Meghan's story laid out in sequence, clear as day. Nothing was left to interpretation. She let the contradictions speak for themselves and then made sure everyone understood exactly what they were looking at. What made it land harder than anything Meghan's own team put out wasn't just the content. It was the tone. She sounded like someone who had already done the homework, already seen the pattern, and was no longer surprised by any of it. That kind of certainty pulls people in fast. Her delivery basically screamed, "I told you so," without her needing to say the words once. Comments flooded in almost immediately. Finally, someone said it out loud. Those receipts don't lie. People who had been quietly skeptical skeptical for months suddenly felt like they had a voice in the conversation. And that one viral clip was echoing louder across social media than an entire Netflix production. But she wasn't just taking aim at one story. She was zooming out, pointing at something bigger. What she called image laundering, the slow, calculated cleanup of anything that didn't fit the perfect version Meghan wanted the world to see. And suddenly, this wasn't just about a birth story anymore. It felt like a full exposure of how the entire image had been built. And this critic made it clear. She was just getting started. Here's the thing about Meghan Markle's story. It doesn't stay still. There's the Netflix version, the Oprah remix, the carefully worded magazine exclusives, and now this, a dramatic live retelling that felt less like a memory and more like a scene from something that had been workshopped and approved before it ever hit the stage.
To the theories of surrogacy. And it's all Meghan and Harry's fault for how they handled it and how they conducted it.
Every version slightly different. Every version somehow more polished than the last. Critics started calling it what it looked like, a never-ending rebrand cycle. And the pattern was hard to ignore once you saw it. No matter which version of the story you were watching, the destination was always the same. Meghan as the victim. Meghan as the hero. Meghan as the misunderstood mastermind who somehow always ends up at the center of her own redemption arc. Every path in the story led back to her, and always in the most flattering light possible. For a while, it worked. The emotional deliveries landed. The carefully timed vulnerability felt genuine. People connected with it because it was designed to be connected with. But something shifted. The more versions that surfaced, the harder it became to figure out which one was real. And audiences started feeling that confusion, not as a reason to give her the benefit of the doubt, but as a reason to start asking harder questions. Because when your truth keeps changing depending on who's watching and what platform you're on, people stop seeing authenticity. They start seeing strategy. And that's a dangerous place for someone whose entire brand is built on owning her story. What was once received as empowerment started landing as performance. Polished, calculated, and critics said, funded heavily enough to keep the cycle going indefinitely. The tears, the shaky voice, the perfectly timed pauses. Once people noticed the pattern, they couldn't unsee it. And the internet had started pulling on a thread that was about to unravel a lot more than just one story. When people started digging, what they found wasn't just inconsistencies, it was absence. Old blog posts gone, photos that used to exist missing, past connections quietly cut off and replaced with safer, more controlled circles. Pieces of a life that didn't fit the current image had been scrubbed away, one quiet deletion at a time. And when you start noticing gaps like that, you stop assuming they're accidents. You start seeing them as decisions. It looked exactly like what critics began calling it, a digital cleanup, a slow, deliberate erasure of anything rough, anything contradictory, anything that didn't belong in the glossy version of Meghan that was being carefully presented to the world. Even small details raised eyebrows. Old captions vanished, early interviews edited or buried, the kind of thing that individually might mean nothing, but stacked together started forming a very clear picture.
The Duke and Duchess of Sussex have quit social media in the latest step away from royal life and the public eye. Harry and
What once felt like vulnerability began looking like strategy. The more polished everything became, the more people questioned what was underneath all of it. Because real people don't curate themselves that completely. Real stories leave traces. They have rough edges that don't get smoothed away because nobody caught them in time. But in Meghan's world, it seemed like every rough edge had been found, assessed, and filtered before anything went public. That sharp-tongued media personality summed it up in a line that stuck with a lot of people. When someone keeps curating the evidence, maybe they're not growing, maybe they're editing. That framing hit hard because it gave language to something audiences had been feeling but hadn't been able to fully articulate. Authenticity doesn't get approved before it goes live, but Meghan's version of real seemed to go through exactly that process every single time. Critics said she wasn't just rebranding, she was rewriting, one quiet removal at a time, and the more people looked, the more they found that had been quietly taken away. But what came next went deeper than deleted posts and missing photos, because the questions that started surfacing weren't just about what had been erased. They were about what had been there from the very beginning. Nobody expected a 1997 magazine to become the most talked about piece of evidence in the entire conversation. But that's exactly what happened. A copy of 17 magazine surfaced, published in March of 1997, and what it contained stopped people cold. The publication referenced Meghan, placing her at 21 years old at the time it went to print. Do that math, and her birth year lands somewhere around 1976, not 1981, not the year that has always been attached to her name and her official story. A full 5-year gap sitting right there in print. From decades ago, before anyone had a reason to fabricate anything. And suddenly, a question that would have seemed outrageous just weeks earlier didn't sound outrageous at all. Online investigators began openly asking, what if the age people have always accepted isn't the real one? Her father has consistently maintained she was born in 1981. But critics pointed out that if the magazine's timeline is accurate, she would have been 16 when that publication came out, not the age that lines up with the story she's told. And that gap doesn't just affect a number on a document. It affects everything connected to it. Because here's where it got even more uncomfortable. The Humphrey yogurt commercial. Meghan has spoken about being 13 years old when she appeared in it, framing it as a pivotal early moment. But Humphrey Yogurt stated plainly that they had never employed anyone aged 13. And then people went back and watched the actual commercial. Right there at the start, her own voice.
13 at a frozen yogurt shop called Humphrey Yogurt.
Humphrey Yogurt still exists and is seeing a...
Her own words, I'm Meghan Markle, I'm 12 years old. Not 13, 12. A detail so specific it couldn't be written off as a simple memory slip. That vocal critic zeroed in on exactly why the age question matters beyond just the number itself. Critics were openly wondering if the timeline around her children is placed against an age several years older than what has been presented. The sequence of events becomes even harder to line up with what the public has been told. And a timeline that had already been questioned started looking even shakier. Now, to be clear, none of what followed has been verified. But online speculation began asking questions that, once raised, were impossible to ignore. Could it be that Meghan herself doesn't actually know her real age? Could she have been given a version of her own story that wasn't fully true? And if that's the case, does that explain the distant, complicated bond that has always seemed to exist between her and her mother, Doria? Because critics were asking out loud, what could drive that kind of distance between a mother and a daughter that runs so visibly deep? It was speculation, but it was the kind that once it's out there doesn't go back in the box. The questions were louder than any answer her team was offering, and the internet wasn't done yet. Just when people thought the conversation couldn't get any stranger, a bizarre clip entered the picture. It sounds almost too odd to be real, but there it was. A camera set up, fixed on the two of them, and then both Meghan and Harry twerking, caught on footage that felt completely out of place with everything surrounding it. The reaction online wasn't just confusion. It was that specific kind of uncomfortable laughter people have when something doesn't make any sense in the context it's appearing in. But that sharp-tongued critic didn't laugh it off. She dissected it, and her read on it was sharp. She argued that the camera wasn't there by accident. Nothing in Meghan's world ends up on camera by accident. Her take was direct. Meghan was already thinking about the footage before it was even finished being recorded, already calculating how it could be packaged later. A Netflix moment, a relatability drop, proof that she and Harry are just a normal, fun couple who goof around when nobody's watching. Except somebody was watching because somebody set up the camera first. That's the part that stuck with people. The point wasn't just about the clip itself, it was about the mindset behind it. You can have a silly private moment with your husband without documenting it. You can laugh together without a fixed camera running in the corner. The decision to record it, especially in a hospital setting, wasn't a spontaneous choice. It was a content decision dressed up as a candid one.
To be quite honest, when I first saw it, I thought this was a sort of spoof that had been made up by somebody because it was so...
And that framing flipped how people saw it entirely. What could have been written off as a quirky personal moment became another data point in the same pattern everyone had already been tracking. Every vulnerable reveal, pre-approved, every candid moment, recorded, every private experience quietly filed away for a future rollout. Critics said it out loud. In Meghan's world, nothing is just lived. Everything is produced first and lived second. And once that lens gets applied, it's impossible to watch any of her moments the same way again. The clip added chaos to an already chaotic news cycle, but it also did something more lasting. It made even the lightest, most human-looking moments feel calculated. And that's a problem that no PR team, no matter how how well-funded, can easily walk back. But as wild as that moment was, it wasn't the one that put the most pressure on everything. Because while all of this was unfolding around Meghan, someone else was getting pulled into the fire, and he hadn't said a single word. Harry hadn't done anything. He hadn't spoken, hadn't responded, hadn't inserted himself into any of it. And somehow that made everything worse. Because silence in the middle of a storm this loud doesn't read as staying out of it. It reads as something else entirely. And the internet, which had already been dissecting every frame of Meghan's story, turned its attention to him with the same intensity. The questions started simple enough. Where is he in all of this? How does a man who once blew up his entire family, walked away from the institution he was born into, and told the world he was choosing truth over tradition? How does that same man stand completely still while his wife's story gets picked apart in real time? His silence wasn't invisible. It was loud, and people were reading into every second of it. Some framed him as a bystander in his own life, a man who had handed over the controls somewhere along the way and was now watching events unfold without any real ability to steer them. Others pushed back on that, saying the situation was more layered than any headline could capture. But even the people defending him couldn't fully explain the stillness. And in the absence of explanation, speculation fills every gap. What made it hit harder was the contrast. This was the same Harry who had given interviews, written a memoir, gone on television, and said things that had shocked people across the world. He had never been shy about speaking when it mattered to him.
Intimate memoir, which I've read, and it's fascinating. It's a very good read by itself.
So the quiet now felt like its own kind of statement, even if nobody could agree on exactly what it was saying. People started going back through public appearances, old interviews, body language and photographs, looking for something that explained the dynamic they were now seeing. And the more they looked, the more the conversation expanded beyond just reputation. It stopped being about one person's image and started being about the partnership itself, about what was actually holding it together, about who was driving and who was along for the ride. For the first time, the scrutiny wasn't landing on Meghan alone. It was landing on both of them equally. And the pressure that had been building around her story suddenly had a second target. Every unanswered question about her pulled a new question about him right along with it. And while that pressure kept building, the media had fully locked in. What had started as a single viral moment was now a full-scale storm, and it was about to get a lot louder. The internet didn't slow down, it accelerated. What had started as one questionable birth story had turned into something that no single team, no matter how experienced or well-funded, could contain. Trending topics took over feeds within hours, commentary channels, gossip pages, online threads, all of them breaking down the same clips, the same contradictions, the same shifting timeline. It was the only story happening in the world, and for a significant corner of the internet, it was. The reactions split almost immediately. On one side, people defending Meghan, arguing she was being held to a standard nobody else in public life gets subjected to. On the other side, people backing that outspoken media critic, saying she had finally given a voice to what millions had already been quietly thinking for a long time. Both sides were loud. Both sides were certain. And that clash kept the algorithm fed and the views climbing into the millions. Memes arrived within hours. Meghan's emotional clips cut directly against that critic's sharpest lines, turned into side-by-side content that spread faster than any official statement could travel. Major outlets that normally stayed above the tabloid noise couldn't resist. Daytime television picked it apart. Was this an honest slip or something that had been carefully engineered from the start? Tabloids ran split headlines. The whole thing became a cultural moment disguised as a celebrity controversy. But underneath all the noise, something more significant was shifting.
Meghan, or just call me Meg, as she apparently likes to go by, and her spare handbag, Harry, have finally left.
People weren't just reacting anymore. They were tired of trying to keep up with versions of a story that kept changing. Tired of being told which emotions to have about a narrative that never seemed to stay still long enough to be trusted. The conversation moved from outrage into something quieter and harder to recover from: widespread skepticism. And for any public figure, skepticism is a far more dangerous place to be than outrage. Outrage fades. skepticism settles in and stays. Meghan's team tried to steer things back, pushed the empowerment angle, leaned into the narrative of a woman being unfairly attacked for simply telling her truth. But the more they pushed, the more people looked. And the more people looked, the more questions kept coming. Old footage resurfaced on its own. Timelines got checked without anyone being asked to check them. Contradictions lined up like dominoes, and the internet knocked them over one by one. For the first time in a long time, Meghan wasn't the one holding the narrative. The internet had taken it out of her hands completely. And that one viral clip from that outspoken media voice had done more damage to the carefully constructed image than years of tabloid coverage ever had. Because it wasn't just criticism. It was organized, evidenced, and delivered in a way that made the audience feel like they were discovering something real rather than being told what to think. The final framing was the one that stuck. The line that kept getting screenshotted, reposted, and quoted across every platform. She's not sharing her story. She's producing it. 6 words that reframed everything. Not a woman living her life publicly. A director running a production. And once that idea was planted, every future Meghan moment would be seen through that exact lens. Cameras, motives, and all. The brand built on authenticity had taken a hit it couldn't quietly walk back from. The image of the relatable, truth-telling, misunderstood woman started showing its seams, and even some of the people who had stood firmly in her corner went quiet, not switching sides, but no longer willing to be loud about it either. That silence from former defenders spoke volumes. What began as one evening's worth of online chatter had turned into something that would follow the conversation for months, not because the internet had proven everything definitively, but because it had asked enough questions loudly enough that the answers, or the lack of them, said everything on their own.
Hollywood is. I know how fake the entertainment industry is. But Meghan Markle and the Sussex squad think this is a win for her.
And one thing had become undeniable by the time the dust started to settle. This wasn't the end of the story. It wasn't even close. Because other voices were already lining up, more footage was already being pulled, and the threads that had been tugged on were connected to things that went much deeper than anyone had fully explored yet. The storm hadn't passed. It had only just found its footing. When you step back and look at everything together, a picture forms that's hard to dismiss. A birth story that shifted, a timeline that blurred, a digital trail that had been quietly cleaned up, a magazine from 1997 that put a number on paper nobody could easily explain away, a yogurt commercial where the age didn't match the memory, a camera set up in a hospital for a moment that was supposed to be private, and a husband whose silence grew louder with every question that didn't get answered. None of it landed as coincidence anymore. Individually, each piece could be written off, a misremembered detail, a minor inconsistency, the kind of thing any person could be forgiven for. But stacked together in sequence, with receipts attached, it stopped looking like a collection of mistakes and started looking like a pattern. And patterns once seen don't disappear. That outspoken media critic didn't create the cracks in the image. She just shone a light on ones that were already there. And the moment that light hit, the internet did the rest. The story Meghan had spent years carefully building, version by version, by platform, suddenly had too many seams showing at once. What's real and what's produced? At this point, even people who wanted to believe her found themselves hesitating. And that hesitation is the most damaging thing that can happen to a brand built entirely on trust. The question isn't whether Meghan Markle will bounce back. She has before. The question is whether the audience waiting on the other side of that comeback will still be willing to take the story at face value. Because once people start fact-checking in real time, they don't stop. And the internet has a very long memory. This story isn't over, not even close. More footage is being pulled, more voices are lining up, and the threads that got tugged on here are connected to things that go much deeper than what's been explored yet. Whether this becomes the moment everything unravels or just another chapter she rewrites, that's still playing out. But one thing is certain, the audience is watching differently now, and that changes everything. If this video gave you something to think about, hit that like button. It helps more people find this content. Subscribe if you're new, because this is only one piece of a much larger story, and we're not done digging. And drop your thoughts in the comments. Do you think there's more to this than what's been reported? Because the conversation down there is always worth reading. We'll see you in the next one.